if the ring were not destroyed, it wouldn't in the long run matter whether Sauron got it himself. As he said once, Gandalf, if he had the ring, would be far worse than Sauron, because he would be righteous and self-righteous and order, coerce the world to its own good. And that was one of my father's greatest fears, was the coercion for good ends.
When an author tells a story, they invite you without prejudice to share in their imagination. And when Tolkien shared his, the world had not yet seen an imagination quite like it. Modern fantasy owes its very existence to Tolkien's generous and eloquent invitation, for its stories boast a true depth built from knowledge, passion, and long hours of labour, languages that feel earthy and real, a long history that feels lived in and organic, tens of thousands of years deep. Every name has a meaning, and if you care to dive into the depths of the lore, as many do, you will find it, like the most intricately crafted treasure hunt. Layers upon layers of meaning, half hidden amidst the tapestry of places and people, all stitched together to make arguably the first ever fantasy world. Or the same world, but in a different stage of imagination, as the professor would describe it. And when adapting his works, it is of the utmost importance that Bat is respected. Anything less is nothing but a gross misunderstanding or a deliberate subversion of his intention. Whenever I open the books or watch the trilogy, I am invited into a world so vast and so detailed that it staggers the mind that someone, one man, could create such a thing. Most fantasy is escapist, and when the escape is done, off you go back to the weary, grey world exactly as it was before the escape. But not with Tolkien, who manages to thread magic into the mundane and nourishes the ordinary with great reverence and meaning. Good food, for example, a high hill, an old tree, or a full pipe. It stays with you. The enchantment bleeds into reality, so much so that you could believe that his stories were remembered, deciphered, translated, and retold rather than conjured into existence by imagination alone. But now, that world is under siege. Amazon's The Rings of Power premiered on their streaming service on the 2nd of September, the anniversary of Tolkien's death. And it is terrible. Utterly, utterly terrible. In their hubris, the showrunners boasted that they were writing the novel Tolkien never wrote, but 4 episodes in, and it is made abundantly clear why he never wrote it. It is mediocre, cliché-ridden fantasy at best, and at worst it's an utterly sacrilegious subversion of a much-beloved world. I attempted to remove my Tolkien cap for the viewing, knowing that most viewers would not be watching through the lens of deep lore, detailed in the Silmarillion, the Unfinished Tales, and others. So ignoring the various gut punches to Tolkien's legendarium, I still found myself feeling an odd combination of bored, nonplussed, and amused, but for all the wrong reasons. They have spent $500 million on the first series alone, along with another $250 million to secure the rights from the Tolkien estate, or a small portion of the rights at least. I feel I can say with some authority, and what bit my long history of not having much of it, that is a lot of money. But for the life of me, I couldn't tell you what that money was spent on. It certainly wasn't on costumes, established actors, or decent writers. I was initially going to write a formal review, a scene-by-scene breakdown going over what it is they did right, and what missed the mark. But it seems the showrunners, J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay, the self-proclaimed writers, weren't actually aiming for any mark, apparently thinking,
"Fuck the mark! Let's not even try to aim at the mark. The mark is for pussies, and is probably rife with systemic racism and regressive patriarchal prejudice. After all, why does it have to be a mark, huh? Why not a Margaret?"
Episode 1 opens with a 15-minute prologue, showing us little Luna Galadriel getting bullied by mean boy elves. Because apparently elves and their infinite wisdom, frolicking in the endless wonders of their undying lands, still bully each other, for no given reason. But her elder brother Finrod calms her down and gifts her some pearls of elven wisdom lifted straight from some open-source fantasy prose generator. Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot? Because the stone sees only downward. The darkness of the water is vast and irresistible. The ship feels the darkness as well, striving moment by moment to master her and pull her under. But the ship has a secret. For unlike the stone, her gaze is not downward but up, fixed upon the light that guides her, whispering of grander things than darkness ever knew. If you don't think that means anything, you're absolutely right. It is utterly meaningless. The first spoken lines of the show, and I found myself having to pause it and have a little moment to myself. The metaphor itself doesn't work, and as such you can replace the objects with anything and still contrive to make the same point, for lack of a better word. Do you know why it is that doors can open and walls cannot? Because walls are rooted in the past. Sedentary in the dark, they stay fixed in place. The door stays in place also, seeming like the wall when closed, but the door has a secret. Unlike the walls, he oils his hinges in fronts of wisdom and swings towards the hopeful light of the future. Or maybe, do you know why camels can walk and screwdrivers cannot? Because screwdrivers content themselves within the darkness of a toolbox. The camel feels this temptation also, striving day by day to squeeze herself inside, but the camel has a secret. For unlike the screwdriver, she can't fit inside a toolbox, and instead walks in the light of the sun, on sands of hope and promise. It is a lazy, great-soul attempt at creative writing that demonstrates that they have no idea how metaphors or analogies actually work. The lines set the bar incredibly low in terms of my expectations, and while I can truthfully say it doesn't get much worse, I'm sad to say it doesn't get much better. Some choice examples include, "We will sweep the enemy from these lands like salt from a table." It is said that the wine of victory is sweetest for those in whose bitter trials it has fermented. If but a whisper of a rumour of the threat you perceive is true, the sea is always right. There are some nice visuals, I will give them that. For example, a sweeping shot of the two trees of Valinor, Lovelin and Telperion, with a brief glimpse of the shadow of Morgoth. However, it is lacking vital context. Morgoth is akin to Lucifer. When the Valar, the gods, sang the universe into existence, Morgoth's voice was the only discordance, and from that discord much of the evil of the world was born into existence. Ridding the story of that context is incredibly jarring, as it forms the backbone of all the conflict that comes after it. It would be like adapting Gone with the Wind, but not having the right to the Civil War, the Confederacy, or the Union, having to vaguely allude to them in passing with a throwaway line at the beginning that says, "During this time there was a nationwide conflict that was really stirring up a lot of trouble," and then proceeding to never mention it again.
Didn't that movie used to have a war in it?
Come on, yep, you've been warned.
Morgoth, as depicted in the Rings of Power, is just apparently quite mean and doesn't care for trees that much. There are then flashes of dragons and eagles crashing to the ground in fiery torrents, intermingled with shots of elves and orcs crowding near each other, doing a bit of screaming, and ineffectually waving their weapons above their heads. And that is that. That is all the first age which we did to, save for a few member berries brought up later on with little reverence and less context. Tolkien's lore now reduced to what are essentially Easter eggs, for people that seem to conflate entertainment with names they recognise. Remember Mithril from the movies? Here's them naming it. Remember Helm's Deep? This bit is a bit like that bit. Elrond and Durin are kind of like Legolas and Gimli. Could you love Legolas and Gimli, right? Remember this? Remember that? Remember when? The show hides behind a mask of nostalgia, just hoping no one realises that there's no face beneath it. It's empty. They claim that they're distancing themselves from the Jackson movies, yet simultaneously leech off its iconography and world-building, because without it they lack anything of substance. In the show, we are led to believe that Galadriel's brother Finrod was killed by Sauron, spurning Galadriel into a single-minded vengeance crusade that, apparently, spans centuries. But gone is any sense of distance, be it through space or time. As a reader, I know that thousands of years passed between these events, 500 plus years for the first age, and then 3,000 plus years in the second, while in the Rings of Power, 3,500 years can pass, and you wouldn't even know it. There's nothing to even suggest it. In the Lord of the Rings trilogy, directed by Peter Jackson, they managed to portray the tragic and slow passage of time with nothing but the vocal richness of Cate Blanchett and writers who knew what they were doing.
Much that once was is lost, for none now live who remember it.
That is how to establish this world. It is steeped in myth, where story and history are blurred into one, with only the oldest, wisest beings on Middle-earth being able to decipher one from the other. It seems that while Tolkien ingrained magic into the mundane, Amazon has seen fit to sow mundanity into the magical, and rob Middle-earth of its weight, of its soul. The depictions of their elves is by far the most regrettable choice. Elves, the fairest and wisest of all beings, now just act like men. They're politically motivated and two-faced, in a grim attempt to steep the story in some courtly intrigue akin to Game of Thrones. Gone is their poetry-steeped culture, one that celebrates art and beauty above power and influence. Gone is their ethereal, illuminating beauty. Gone is their foresight and otherworldly wisdom. Gil-galad, High King of the Noldor Elves, is now a duplicitous, moronic coward who short-sightedly forces Galadriel into an early retirement, back to Valinor, which is apparently something he can do, despite the Noldor being exiled. But seeing as we're never given any dates or time span, there's no way of knowing when these things are actually happening. So again, if you're a book reader, best rid yourself of any expectations that the law will be even slightly respected. Elrond is now just a downcast career politician who resentfully writes the king's speeches. Badly. For example, these soldiers have swept across crag and crevice, washing away the last remnants of our enemy, like a spring rain over the bones of a spoiled carcass. He even has the audacity to look pleased with himself when he hears it out loud. Apparently he isn't deemed noble enough to sit at the big boys' table, despite coming from a royal lineage that boasts, without exaggeration, literal divine ascension, as well as a brother that founded the kingdom of Numenor, the greatest civilizations ever known. But nah, try harder, Elrond, you commoner. Celebrimbor, Lord of Eregion, creator of the rings at Paratium, is now a befuddled old barrister, sporting a rather dashing velour dressing gown. He is meant to be of an age with Galadriel, but looks about 3 times that, despite elves not tending to age. But by far the most bizarre and bewildering decision is how he chose to depict Galadriel. In the books, she is a gifted scholar, with angelic insight and grace. She is drawn to Middle-earth because she yearns to rule her own realm. She does this arm in arm with her husband Celeborn and her daughter Celebrian. She is a respected lawmaster, revered elven royalty, and much beloved by all. In the Rings of Power, however, she is clumsily transfigured into a commander of the northern armies which, from what I saw, consist of a dozen angsty elves who all hate her. She now wields a 10-handed sword, broken because she's killed so many orcs, wears full plastic armor, and is full of piss and vinegar, as the 2 lead writers describe. Her husband and daughter are not mentioned. She is neither graceful nor insightful. She is brash and unlikable from the very start. She treats everyone she talks to with a thinly veiled contempt. Humanorean royalty, contentious and abrasive. The man who just saved her life, snide and threatening. Her closest friend of 2,000 years, dismissive and resentful. Whinging and whining at everyone she comes into contact with like an obstreperous teenager who's just had their iPhone confiscated. If the writers consider this behavior as strong or commanding, that is incredibly telling in and of itself. It feels wrong to even call her Galadriel, for after you've changed her lineage, her past, her motivations, her family and friends, the places she went, the people she met, and even the time in which all these things are meant to take place, how is she in any way the same character? They turned one of the most powerful, otherworldly and compassionate fantasy figures into an unlikable, selfish brat, who cares about nothing save her incredibly narrow-minded vengeance quest. She is written by 2 idiots, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. Then there are the show's original characters, the Harfoots, hobbits in truth, but without that pesky licensing issue, who are presented now as nomadic, unwashed travellers, sporting a wide variety of appalling Irish accents. A small, though incredibly diverse travelling community, where accents and skin colour are seemingly just dished out at random, and man are they quirky. They eat snails, they're clumsy, they talk like simpletons, and they are cold-heartedly brutal. Yes, in this small, neighbourly community, anyone who falls behind is left behind, forever, without leniency or exception. They celebrate this with a creepy Wicker Man-esque ceremony, where Lenny Henry leads a peculiar procession of children in odd outfits, all the while chanting, "Nobody goes off trail, and nobody walks alone." This is followed by a candlelit vigil held for all the souls they've counselly abandoned in the past. They talk of love and community and how they must band together to survive, but are happy to exile anyone who breaks their abstract and archaic rules. Their attempt at lightheartedness is jarring and comes across as cult-like and unsettling, with all the charm of a bad acid trip at a farmer's market. It is a complete tonal shift, one that does not work. They do not act in the least bit like hobbits. And I know it's a nitpick, but they make constant references to how big their feet are, despite them having no frame of reference. They all have big feet. They're just their feet to them. It would be like writing dialogue for two Neanderthals and thinking the line, "We stay true to each other, with our hearts even more opposable than our thumbs," was suitably poignant and steeped in culture. There are also two new characters introduced, with a whole new region that is not present in the source material, the region of Tir Hadid in the Southlands, which seems to be Mordor before it's Mordor. We are shown a small village consisting of a sparse but highly diverse collection of human villages, half a dozen nameless white elves, and one named elf of colour. His phrase, not mine. Aramdir, complete with the freshest of fades, is actually a breath of fresh air, as he is at least attempting to give a performance. However, he plays opposite a human female named Frongwyn, and their whole characterization centers around a secret, forbidden romance. So forbidden and so secretive that even the audience is left guessing as to who these people are, how they know each other, and what's going on. There is no chemistry whatsoever. There is no scene establishing their compassion or love for one another. It's just your bog-standard Hollywood interpretation of a love, or love, that doesn't require the two lovers to have anything in common or even share an ounce of genuine attachment to the other. How do we know there is love? We're told. Just like we're told how strong Galadriel is, and we're told how evil Sauron is, and we're told how the dwarves are being secretive. We're told everything, and shown nothing. Bronwyn and Arondir find one of their neighbouring villages burnt to the ground. Its people nowhere to be seen. It's only a few hours away. They presumably come here sometimes and know these people, and yet they both placidly stroll through the rubble with all the concern and curiosity of a young couple leisurely looking for their car in a busy car park. They then find a fairly mundane tunnel, and Bronwyn observes that no man did this. I'd like to know how she's so sure of that. Men can't dig tunnels.
You're right, no human being would stack books like this.
Preceded by perhaps the cringiest line of dialogue in the show thus far. While Arondir and Bronwyn are investigating this hole in the ground, Bronwyn says, "You can't go. You don't know what's down there." To which Arondir dramatically responds, "That is why I must go." The elf, in his infinite wisdom, must do something because he doesn't know something else. His days must be full of hundreds of mindless detours and distractions, opening every box he finds, climbing every tree, going through everyone's pockets and breaking into their houses. He does not know, you see, so he must find out. He does not consider for a second that it could be a trap or that he might get caught. It is, by the way, and he does. In Episode 2, Lord Elrond and Lord Celebrimbor, wearing his trademark dressing gown, are discussing their legacies. There is a throwaway reference to Feanor and the Silmarils before talk shifts to the building of a master forge, one that Celebrimbor intends to further the glory of all Elvendon. Seeing as they're elves, they have an eternity to see it built, but Celebrimbor imposes an arbitrary deadline, saying that it must be completed before the spring. Why? Unclear, and Elrond doesn't feel the need to ask any follow-up questions, merely suggesting that they seek help from the dwarves of Khazad-dûm. So off they go. And then there they are, at least 100 miles away, just Elrond and Celebrimbor on a leisurely stroll, no retainers, no horses, no supplies, wearing the same clothes they were wearing in a previous scene, as though it were literally right next door. The dwarves do not expect them. They apparently haven't sent word ahead. They are elven lords on a diplomatic mission, but no one acts as though this is the case. Celebrimbor, Lord of Arahion, is instructed to just turn around and go back the way he came, and he's just kind of cool with it. While Elrond is invited in due to invoking some old and completely made up for the series Dwarven rite. This involves smashing rocks with hammers, because dwarves. This and the preceding scenes raise many questions, such as, is this meant to be funny? Is it meant to be wholesome? Why are they breaking so many rocks? What is this? Why is it happening? None of which are answered to any satisfaction. By episode 4, we learn that Elrond's diplomatic mission is a success. This happens off-screen for some reason. And also, work has begun on Celebrimbor's forge, also off-screen. We also learn that all of this must have happened inside a week, because while the dwarves and the elves have done what seems like months of travelling, trading and construction, all the other storylines have only progressed a few days. So, something weird's happened there. Moria looks okay. They have kept the square-edged symmetrical aesthetic that the movies established, but the tone is off. They play the entirety of the Dwarven storyline as though it were an odd fantasy sitcom, making an odder decision to have important scenes take place off-screen. In episode 4, a mine collapses and some dwarves are trapped inside. This leads to a falling out between Joan and his father, the king of Khazad-dûm. We neither see the miners being rescued nor the fight between father and son. We just hear about it afterwards. Why? Obviously, it's to make room for the arbitrary use of slow motion in scenes that don't call for it. We are then treated to Numenor, the greatest civilization ever known, where we are gifted to a sudden injection of allegory and thinly veiled political commentary. In the source material, due to the culture stagnating and falling to corruption and decadence, Numenor begins to envy the elves' immortality, resenting their long life, fearing death, and turning their backs on the Valar, or God, ultimately. It is the tragedy of a post-nature society reeling from the damnation and abandonment of their faith. None of those features in the series, however. Now it is a one-to-one racial allegory, because famously Tolkien loved allegory. The mean Numenorians are racist against elves, while the nice Numenorians, the elves, are just swell. The mean ones want to make Numenor great again, believe the elves are taking their trades, and are predominantly white, led by a man who might as well be called Donald Deer, son of Trump Deer. Get the subtle messaging yet? Racism is bad. Populism is bad. Vote Biden. This brings us round to the question of the show's politics and diversity and the so-called racist backlash it received. From the early days, the show used its diversity as a marketing ploy, encouraging fans to rejoice at their elf of colour and the first female dwarf ever on screen, only to then claim toxic fans were being racist for not appreciating the change. To be clear, not one criticism of the show that I have seen has been based solely on the diversity of the characters. The show is laughably bad in almost every aspect, and many people have said so. But even if the criticism was aimed at the diversity, that doesn't make it inherently racist. I'd argue such flagrant and frequent use of the word only serves to cheapen it, and thus rob it of meaning. If Denzel Washington was cast as Henry VIII, it would not be racist to suggest he doesn't look right for the part. No more or less racist than if you cast Tom Holland as Gandhi or Jessica Chastain as Muhammad Ali. The Reigns of Power is a failure, a disaster, and the root of that lies in its far more egregious mistakes than just cheap tokenism. There are countless serious issues, chiefly, but not limited to, the aforementioned complete revision of all previously established law, poorly written characters and dialogue, the presence of modern political allegory, the innumerable contrivances required for the plot to develop, the overall cheapness of the production despite its billion-dollar investment. Costumes are bizarre, lazy, and cheap. There is a prevalence of plastic fabrics, lycra under armour, ill-fitting plastic breastplates, and they always look pristine and freshly laundered. Some of the characters seem to only have one costume that is worn for every weather at every occasion. Background characters, whatever region they're from, be it Numenor, the Southlands, or the Harfoots, all dressed the same in generic, vaguely medieval peasant clothes. The dialogue is stilted and clumsy. Conversations often comprise of two characters espousing non sequiturs at each other in a tone that is at odds with the words they're saying. The characterization is inconsistent, often scene to scene. Their motivations are completely unclear and seemingly irrelevant to the broader story. It all feels soullessly cobbled together by a clueless corporate hive mind that is desperately trying to understand why people like this fantasy stuff and failing. All of this in spite of how much the showrunners profess to love Tolkien. But ultimately words are wind, and you must judge JD and Patrick not by what they say but what they do. And what they did for the first 4 episodes alone is, in my view, literary heresy. I am aware, in being swept up on this particular controversy, that I may well be playing Amazon's game, in reacting to the series at all and giving them what they want, for they hold wholeheartedly to the ethos, there is no such thing as bad publicity. And they even take it a step further. There's no such thing as anything, apart from publicity. The creators knew the controversy was coming. They welcomed it. It is part and parcel with their marketing campaign. People have to talk about it. You could be excused for thinking Amazon nor the studio has taken a side, what with their politically charged marketing, the vacuous Vanity Fair articles, and the endless amounts of secrecy and name-calling. But they don't really care. Whether you're an NPC continuing to clap like a seal for diversity's sake, or an outraged fanon screaming a decade worth of frustration into a 1-star IMDb review, Amazon holds equal amounts of contempt for both parties. For all people, in fact, for any thread of magic found within the ordinary. Good or bad, right or wrong, true or false, doesn't matter. The main objective is relevance. So long as it's trending, so long as the comments are full of angry, lost people flinging themselves at one another, it is doing its job. Not as a piece of art to be enjoyed, but as a product to be consumed, an abstraction to hold the public attention while the real world falls apart. In the age of entertainment through subscription, there is no longer any prerequisite to create anything objectively good. Almost as though the self-labelled controversies that surrounded their production were more important than the quality of the product itself. Movies and TV shows are no longer made to be lasting. They are just consumer fodder, blasted out by content factories whose only real aim is to maintain some semblance of fleeting relevance. All they need is a subscription. All they need are the views. Before now, I would have said that fan bases are jaded and traumatized, hurt and betrayed to such an extent that apathy had crept in, that no one really cared anymore. But it has been incredibly heartening to see that, for many people, corporatizing the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's works is, quite simply, a step too far. Tolkien and his secondary world remains sacrosanct. Amazon's offering has been rejected by the fans. Legality and rights and the Tolkien estate's blessing means little and less. It is not welcome. No admittance, not even on party business. You cannot pass. If you've liked what you've read or heard, please consider sharing and subscribing. I am a fantasy author, illustrator, and aspiring poet. If you'd like to help support an artist that doesn't have the backing of $1 billion, you can find my fantasy work here. Thank you.
When in doubt, Eleanor Brandyford. Always follow your nose.
Shut your mouth!
All right, Bob.
Shut your filthy mouth!